Hello everyone, I would like to welcome you to Life Group. Before we start the video, I would like to remind everyone that we will not be having Life Group next week. Instead, join us next Wednesday for a prayer service at 6:30. Now let's get back to the video.
So tonight we continue our study of the Sermon on the Mount, and we're going to pick up tonight in Matthew chapter 5, verse 13. You are the salt of the earth, but if salt has lost its taste, how shall its saltiness be restored? It is no longer good for anything except to be thrown out and trampled under people's feet. You are the light of the world. A city set on a hill cannot be hidden, nor do people light a lamp and put it under a basket, but on a stand, and it gives light to all in the house. In the same way, let your light shine before others, so that they may see your good works and give glory to your Father who is in heaven. This passage is actually a great explanation of why our nation and the church is in its current state. Because what Jesus is doing here is he's helping us to see that how people perceive God is our responsibility. And Christians haven't taken responsibility for that in many times. So a lot of people's mindset, I feel like they go through life, there's a lot of believers, they go through life and they're saved, their family is saved, they go to church, and because of all that, they're comfortable. And they feel like whatever happens in the grand scheme of things is up to God. Whatever happens in the nation, whatever happens to the world, it's up to God. I've got a little part to play, but it's really up to God. He's in control of everything, and so it'll all work out in the end, and there's going to be some that go to hell, some go to heaven. I really don't have a lot of control over that, but me and my family, we're saved, and we're going to heaven, and so I'm pretty good with that. What Jesus is actually communicating here is the opposite of that, because where you might say, God is the light of the world, Jesus turned it around and said, no, you are the light of the world. Actually, he's pretty harsh with it in a way, because in verse 13 he says, you are the salt of the earth. Not me, not God. He's saying my followers, those whom my spirit I've put in their heart, and I've left them behind on this planet with a mission. He said, you are the salt of the earth. But if that salt has lost its taste, how shall its saltiness be restored? He's not talking about salt here. He's talking about people. He's talking about us. He's talking about Christians. So he's saying if a Christian has lost their saltiness, what he is saying is that it is no longer good for anything except to be thrown out and trampled under people's feet. That's pretty harsh. In other words, if you're not doing your job, when the church loses its fire, when the church loses its boldness, when the church loses its voice, he's saying, what is the point of me having a church? This is what Jesus is saying. What is the point of me having a church if all you're going to do is go inward, you're going to self-protect, you're going to go in your bubble, you're going to hide from the world, you're going to take care of yourself, but you're not going to worry about the world around you. He said, I don't think you understand. I left you here to be the salt of the earth. Then he continues verse 14. He says it another way because he's trying to communicate a point. He's bringing it multiple angles. You are the light of the world. When he says you're the light of the world, what he's saying is you are the guide. You're giving guidance to the world, that's a world that is in darkness. You're giving them guidance. Another way to say it, you're giving them leadership. You're showing them the way. You're showing them the path to God. So he says, you're the light of the world. A city set on a hill cannot be hidden, nor do people light a lamp and put it under a basket, but on a stand, and it gives light to all that. So he's fighting this mentality of, I've got the light, but now I'm going to hide it. Or I've got the light, but I'm not going to blaze it and put it out bright for everybody to see. He said, why would you get the light and then hide it? You know, some people say that sometimes. Well, I'm a closet Christian, you know, or my faith is very personal. You know, your faith's not meant to be personal. It's meant to be out there to lead others to God. So he said, you're the light of the world. Think of it this way. If the world is in complete darkness, if you took all the believers out of the world would be in complete darkness, not physical, but spiritual. And there'd be no light. There'd be no direction. There'd be no knowledge of how to get people to God. There'd be no knowledge of how to access God. There'd be no hope. If you took all the believers on the planet out, the world would immediately dive into a place of darkness, sin, horror, really. So what Jesus was saying is, collectively, my followers, my disciples on this planet, you are the light. You are the light that's going to lead people out of the darkness towards God. It'd be no different, just a simple example, it'd be no different if you were in a house totally black, totally pitch black, and you were the only one that had a flashlight. And you turned the flashlight on, you said, follow me, guys, this is the way out. Everybody started following you. You have the light, you lead other people out. But what believers are doing many times is they've got the light, and they've got it, and they're using it to get themselves out, but they're leaving everybody else behind. And what Jesus is saying is, you're the light of the world, and without that light, they don't know how to get to God. So we have to accept this as a challenge. We have to accept this as our orders from our Master and our Lord of how we are to live and operate on this planet. Verse 16, in the same way that people light a lamp and they put it on a stand to light the whole house, he says, in the same way, let your light shine before others. The light that you received from me at salvation, let that light shine before other people so that they may see your good works and give glory to your Father who is in heaven. You see, our light points people to God. When they see the way you think, the way you act, the way you live, the way you sacrifice, your kindness, your peace, all of that, when they see that, it points them to God. It helps them know that there is a God and that what's different about you is the God in you. And so Jesus is saying, do this on purpose. Don't hide it. Do it on purpose so that when people see it, they'll give glory to God. It'll draw people unto God. That's why I said at the beginning that this passage is a great explanation for why the nation is in its current state. If you want a simple explanation of why our nation is in the current state, it's because believers have not let their light shine. That is really that simple. We've got enough Christians and enough believers in this nation, more than any other nation in the world. And if we were letting our light shine, the world around us would be making right decisions on things. The nation would be going in the right direction. But the reason that we see a moral decline in our nation is because the believers are not letting their light shine. And the more persecution that comes, the more resistance that comes, the more tempted believers are to put their light out. The more believers are tempted to put their light under a basket, as Jesus talked about. The more tempted believers are to not be bold about what they believe. So that is a strategy of the enemy, is to suppress believers, to make them feel intimidated, and then they will not let their light shine. But when we don't let our light shine, the world is the consequence. They are the ones that are hurting when we don't let our light shine. You see, many times people that are far from God, their whole mindset, viewpoint is clouded, darkened, even blinded, as the Bible talks about. And when someone has the light, someone who has the light comes in and through a viewpoint, through something they say, they bring light into the situation. Oftentimes those blinders can fall off and they can begin to see clearly. As a pastor, I have this happen all the time. People come in my office, sometimes even believers. I had this happen just not too long ago. Someone came in my office and they were convinced that God wanted them to do something a particular way. And I knew as soon as they started talking about it, this is not biblical. This is not right. And so in a kind, loving way, I gave them my opinion about what the Bible said about it and how the Bible thought about it. And it changed their whole mindset. It changed their whole belief. Now, I wish every counseling session was like that as a pastor, but it's not. But in that case, it was. I brought light into the situation, and it caused the blindness to fall off, the cloudiness to leave. Light was incepted into the situation, and as a result, they responded to God correctly. This is what the world is missing. The world needs the light of believers in their life. They need your opinion. They need your viewpoint. They need your voice. They need the light that Jesus is talking about to shine in their life. So many times we're afraid to share our opinion. We're afraid to share our beliefs because we don't want to offend somebody. We don't want to hurt somebody's feelings. We want people to not like us. But so many times the only voices that people have in their life, coming from the media, coming from friends, coming from family, coming from their own mind, is just darkness. It's thoughts and viewpoints that don't line up with God, don't line up with the Bible, and these are the only things that are coming into people's minds. And so sometimes you are the only voice of light. You're the only example of light that can come into that person's life. And so if you suppress that, then we have to go back to what Jesus was saying in the beginning. What is the point of your light if all you're going to do is hide it? What is the point of you being salt if you've lost your saltiness? So you've got to be bold and you've got to be confident in letting that light shine into other people's lives. There are people in your life that need it. There are people in this world that need it. Listen to this passage from 2 Corinthians 5, verse 18. He says, all of this is from God, who through Christ reconciled us to himself and gave us the ministry of reconciliation. Just now right there. I mean, what a powerful statement. He said, God, through Christ, reconciled the world to himself. The work is done. It's complete. But now, he's given you the ministry of reconciliation. When he says reconciliation, he's talking about reconciling sinners to God. Taking sinners who are far from God, bringing them near, and helping them to become sons and daughters of God, reconciling that relationship. And this verse tells us that the church has been given the ministry of reconciliation. That means we've been given the responsibility to reconcile the world to God. Well, if we're quiet and we're not letting that light go out, then that ministry is not being accomplished. This has happened at different seasons and ages of the church. You can go back and look at the Dark Ages, the Middle Ages, where the church was not picking up the ministry of reconciliation, and people suffered for it. And people's mindsets towards God were totally wrong. They didn't know God loved them. They didn't know God wanted a relationship with them. They didn't know that God was their friend and not their enemy. And that was all the church's fault. And so our job, we've got to constantly fight for this. We can't slip into this protective bubble mode where we're not letting our light shine and all we're concerned about is just protecting ourselves. We have got to let our light shine, no matter if there's persecution or resistance. In spite of that, we've got to be bold and we've got to let the light of God come out of us. But he continues in verse 20. He says, therefore, we are ambassadors for Christ, God making his appeal through us. Do you understand what that statement means? God is making his appeal to sinners through us. When you open your mouth, God is speaking to sinners through you. Well, what if we're quiet? What if we are not doing that? Then it limits God's ability to make his appeal to sinners. So you've got to understand how crucial our role is in this and not just put it all off on God. Like, oh, it'll all happen anyway. God's will will happen and people will be reached and it'll all work out in the end anyway. I believe we're responsible. And I believe that it matters whether we follow these instructions or not. The final thing I want to tell you tonight as we think about things that will motivate us to be more bold in our faith. Every Christian needs to settle this in their heart. What I believe is not belief at all. What I believe is not belief. What I believe is fact. What I believe about Jesus, what I believe about God, what I believe about the Bible is fact. It's not a belief system, it's a truth system. And the reason that's important is because when everybody has a belief, well, I believe this. Well, I believe that. Well, I have this perspective. You have that. Then everybody's belief is equal. You can believe what you want, I can believe what I want, and everybody's belief is equal. What we believe is not belief at all. It is fact. For example, you can say, well, I believe in the law of gravity. Well, your belief in the law of gravity doesn't make it the law of gravity. It doesn't make it true. If you didn't believe in it, it doesn't make it false. It is what it is. And that is what our life is founded on. It is founded on the truth of truths. It is founded on the Word of God. There is nothing more true than His Word and what we believe. So I'm glad we believe it. But if we didn't believe it, it's still true. Our belief doesn't make it true. It is true. And once you settle that and understand that, it changes how you communicate to people, or it should change how you communicate to people, because now I'm not communicating my beliefs. I'm communicating something that is true, that you need to know, that can save your life. I think probably the group of people that could relate most to this would be like a doctor or a physician that has a patient and they know that there is something wrong with them, like perhaps a terminal illness or something like that. They've come across information and they know that their patient is terminally ill. Well, that's not pleasant to communicate. That's not enjoyable that could upset them. You're going to make them cry. You're going to upset. You're going to see that person break down. They're not going to like what you have to say. But you have to tell them the truth, because that's the only way to help them. It's the only way to go forward. We find ourselves in much of the same situation as believers. No, the world doesn't want to hear that they're sinners. No, the world doesn't want to hear that they're not right with God. Nobody wants to hear that. But as people that bear the truth, we have a job to do. As ambassadors for Jesus Christ, we have a job to do, and that is to spread light in the world. And that's what Jesus was telling us in this early part of Matthew 5. He said, you are the light of the world. You are the salt of the earth. However well you do your job as salt and light is how well people are going to be reconciled to me. Go out and do what I've called you to do.